Hi again guys, and welcome to another installment of Rivals, the Versus matchup series where we pit two or more really well matched rivals up against each other in kind of a top trump style match where the lap times, the top speed, the acceleration, etc. don't really have as much of a bearing. But what does have a bearing is the on paper, as I said, top trumps style numbers, to find out purely for the fun of it which one wins in a straight up numbers match. And in this particular matchup we've got two very strong track only specials. These are cars that are so extreme and so specific at what they do that they're not even eligible for racing. And the two are, of course, the FXX from Ferrari and the Zonda R from Pagani. So, let's see how they match up. First up, we have the FXX, which is, of course, kind of an evolution model based on, visually at least, the Ferrari Enzo. Mechanically, though, it's a very major overhaul that's been done to the car. It turns it into something very reminiscent of a Le Mans-style racer. But, as we already said, neither of these cars are actually eligible for racing, so it's much more of a specialised machine. And in fact, on a few occasions throughout the year, the individual owners of FXXs can get together and race them. And that's basically the ultimate toy. A car which you can't race, you can't drive it on the road, you just occasionally get to race it against other people with the exact same vehicle. That really is basically the ultimate toy box. So the question is, what does that actually give you in real racing situations? Because of course in real life you can't race it, but on the game you can. So what does the FXX in particular offer in that regard? Well, being based on an Enzo, it's always going to be quick, and in a straight line it is the faster of the two cars. The top speed is around 20 miles per hour stronger on the FXX than it is on the Zonda R. The FXX can top out at around 285 without NOS or slipstream, compared to the Zonda's roughly 265, so significantly quicker. As far as acceleration as well, the FXX is the faster of the two, even without NOS, and in fact, off the line, it's one of the quickest rear-wheel drive cars in the game. As far as handling, though, it's a different story, because although the FXX is certainly extremely rapid and good around the track, not just in a straight line, it's definitely not the most beginner-friendly and easy-to-use of track-only vehicles. The Zonda R is a much more beginner-friendly vehicle. You can push the Zonda R much harder without making anywhere near as many mistakes, and even getting a clean lap when you're pushing a fully tuned FXX as hard as it can go is much more difficult than with the Zonda. Now, it can give you a strong lap time, and around the Nurburgring, I got this FXX to run a lap of 5 minutes 57.8. That's serious territory, especially considering that this is of course not a prototype race car. So, for an overview of the FXX, I would say it's an extremely dependable and insanely quick all-round vehicle, but it's definitely not beginner-friendly. It's a professional driving machine, in a similar way to something like a TVR Speed 12. But now, of course, let's consider its rival, the Zonda R. Now, the Zonda R, despite being very similar in its purpose and in its style to some degree to the FXX, is much more of a friendly vehicle. It's more forgiving, it's more beginner-friendly, it's easier to push the car harder without making anywhere near as many mistakes. You can clip the grass with a Zonda R, you can clip the curb, you can maybe push it a bit too far in a corner, and although of course eventually you could fly off the track, it allows you more leeway to work with when you are pushing it hard. And around the Nurburgring, with me driving of course, and it would be different for different people, the Zonda R was the faster of the two. The Ferrari, as I just said, put in a 5:57.8 lap, compared to the Zonda R's 5:49.8. So roughly 8 seconds quicker. That's no small task. Now, the Zonda R does have many superior specs in many ways to the FXX, and in some ways the FXX is also superior as well. But the thing about both of these cars is that even though they do outclass each other in different ways, they still make excellent rivals to each other, and they are both very, very effective competition vehicles. And the fact that we have them on Gran Turismo as well as other racing games is a really cool thing, because in real life even the people who own these cars almost never have the opportunity to actually use them under competition circumstances. As far as I'm aware, the Zonda R never competes in any form of racing. It's only done a few record-breaking laps of the Nurburgring, and you can drive it occasionally on the right track. With the FXX you get some racing, but still not much. So to be able to race both of these cars on Gran Turismo, as well as other games, is really cool, because it allows you to experience at least a fraction of what these insane cars are actually capable of. Cars which, technically speaking, don't even need to exist. They serve such a tiny purpose that they're almost useless. But what they do is so cool that they're amongst the most loved vehicles within technically the supercar, or some would say hypercar, class. But now let's get to the crux of the series, which is of course the top trump style matchup. Now, as we said earlier, both of these cars have big numbers, huge power, significant amounts of torque, extremely high PP levels, big prices, and low weight. And even though they do beat each other in different ways, they're both very strong all-round vehicles. So, how do they compare? Well, bringing up our specs, you can immediately see some ways in which they can outdo each other. Initially, you have the price, where the Zonda, which is still an expensive car, you're talking LMP money for both of these vehicles, is cheaper by 350 grand. As far as engine size though, which of course isn't always a good thing to have a larger engine, but top trump style and all that, the Ferrari gets the point there, being a 6.3 litre to the Zonda's 6. As far as PP, the Zonda actually beats the Ferrari by 10 PP points at 683 to the Ferrari's 673, and that's perhaps surprising given how insanely quick the Ferrari is. As far as power as well, I think many people actually forget this, but the Zonda is the more powerful of the two. The Ferrari is regarded as being extremely powerful, which it is, but nowhere near as many people tend to remember just how powerful this Zonda is in its fully tuned form. And it's actually powerful enough to give the Zonda the point. As far as torque as well, and this may also be surprising, the Zonda wins again. You don't typically think of vehicles like these as having a huge amount of torque, because they tend to be much more high-revving, shallower engines in terms of bore and stroke, which tend to go for more high-level screaming power rather than low-down thumpy torque. However, both of these cars have a huge amount of torque. Overall though, the Zonda R does get the point again with a lot more torque than the Ferrari, over 100 foot-pounds more at 787 foot-pounds. As far as weight though, where they are very, very similar again, the Ferrari interestingly edges out the Zonda by just 6 kilos, a tiny margin between the two. And as far as lap times, as I've said before in this series, we don't actually count a point for the lap times because there are just too many variables. It's dependent on driver, track, tuning, etc. As usual, I have put down below in the description the exact lap times that these cars achieved. But it is interesting to note that, as I mentioned earlier, the Zonda was quicker. And I have to say, the main reason for that is the drivability. The Ferrari certainly has outstanding straight-line performance for a track car, but it's that strong, unwavering consistency to the Zonda R's handling that gave it the win in terms of pure lap time, at least on the Nurburgring. So overall, I was expecting this match to be very, very close in a similar way to the Selena 7 versus Ford GT match, But once again, it's actually not as close a battle as you might think. I was initially leaning towards the FXX for the victory, but that's not the case. In fact, the Ferrari only gets 2 points to the Zonda's 5. It's still a fantastic matchup between these two cars though, and as I said before, they are both very, very worthy of your time and money. So either of these cars are definitely worth checking out if you don't own either or one of them. And if, as always, you do have rivals matches that you'd like to see in the future of this series, then feel free to slap those down below. Once again, if you have already suggested it, you don't need to put it twice. But if you do have a new idea, feel free to slap that down in the comments. And as always with these videos, if you would like a more in-depth review of either of the cars where we go more into what they're capable of and the specs, etc., then you could check out again in the description below my individual reviews for these two vehicles. But that's it overall for this particular Rivals matchup. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.